This video is brought to you by Dragon City. What's up, Wisecrack? Michael here. What's the deal with comedians delivering the news? Are they comedians or reporters? Pick a lane. In all seriousness, if you've consumed any of the horrible news lately, there's a good chance at least some of it came from comedians like Trevor Noah, Jon Oliver, Samantha Bee, or Hasan Minhaj. With hosts promising to make their comedy more informative and politically engaged, it seems like they're intentionally pitching themselves as an alternative to cable news. And while Trevor Noah and Samantha Bee might be more entertaining than Chris Wallace or Rachel Maddow, we can't help but wonder, is comedy news a brilliant symbiosis of the comedic and the political? Or is it just a kind of mental junk food that occasionally makes us snicker?
She came after him again tonight. I bet when he got in his car later, she just popped up in the backseat like, oh, and another thing.
Let's find out in this Wisecrack Edition, Comedy News, Deep or Dumb. Before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to Dragon City, a mobile RPG available on iOS and Android. Dragon City is like a hero collector, but instead of heroes, you collect dragons, generate gold to buy food, and level up your dragons for battle. There are hundreds of dragons hidden in Dragon City for you to collect. I recently found the binge dragon, the movie fanatic dragon, and the serial killer dragon. You want to collect as many dragons as you can, but it's also possible to breed different dragon species to complete your collection. Here, I bred my binge dragon with the movie fanatic dragon, and they had the neon dragon. Collect as many dragons as you can and use them to battle. Download the game for free using the link in the description. Now, back to the show. First, a bit of history on comedy news shows. Much like the career of Jon Oliver, modern comedy news was born in England before finding success in America. The germinal versions of the comedy news format can be seen in the work of frequent collaborators Armando Iannucci and Chris Morris, two British political satirists who collectively were behind shows like Veep and The Thick of It, as well as movies like Four Lions and The Day Shall Come. Their first TV show, The Day Today, aired in 1994 and offered a satirical take on British news. While it brought up current events, the show had no intention of being informative, and instead focused on the absurdity of news media. Morris's next show, Brass Eye, was an even more intense satirization of the sensational tone of current affairs shows.
There's your £26,000, but I'm watching you from a balloon, and I can see a very long way.
I go along with that.
One of its most infamous episodes was the Pete-ageddon special, which explored the moral panic and hysteria around pedophiles and the sexualization of children in the media.
Jez North is released tomorrow. Can we be sure that pervert mechanics haven't built him one of these?
Of course we can't.
The episode immediately led to over 3,000 complaints and criticism from government officials. While the work of Iannucci and Morris set a novel standard for using the news format to create comedy magic, their aim was satirizing society and the media, not providing actual news or information. This was the basic ethos of even the original Daily Show hosted by Craig Kilborn, which focused on covering oddball stories and offered comedic takes on historic events.
Getting everyone together, getting everything to work out.
And laughter turns to tears.
It also included lots of field pieces, which, according to former anchor Steve Carell, were a little too mean in hindsight. But no one was watching the first iteration of The Daily Show in hopes of getting their daily dose of news. This all changed when Jon Stewart took over the show in 1999. Under Stewart's reign, the show became significantly more news-driven. This shift was put into sharp focus by their coverage of the 2000 election and politics after 9/11. By 2009, a Time magazine poll showed that Stewart had become the most trusted news anchor on the air. Stewart even effectively shamed real news show CNN's Crossfire out of existence by appearing as a guest and roasting its host for their sensationalism and partisan hackery.
Your partisan, what do you call it, hacks.
Wait, John, wait.
Thanks to Stewart, The Daily Show was so influential that basically every single comedy news show right now is hosted by its alumni, including Jon Oliver, Samantha Bee, Hasan Minhaj, and Wyatt Cenac. And then there's Stephen Colbert, who used his Daily Show spinoff as a stepping stone to eventually become the host of CBS's The Late Show. History aside, is this modern format deep or dumb? Does this injection of comedy make for an even better method of asking questions and informing the audience? To figure that out, we're going to get some help from comedy theorist Todd McGowan and his book, Only a Joke Can Save Us. For McGowan, comedy happens when we are surprised by a moment where lack and excess meet. Put simply, a moment where something that's seemingly insignificant is treated with excessive importance, or a moment where something very significant is treated with a lacking indifference. And sometimes, these moments not only make us laugh, they help us to rethink the world around us. But let's start with the meeting of excess and lack. While this sounds a little heady, McGowan uses the example of the Black Knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail, in which the knight loses all 4 limbs in a sword fight but refuses to give up, claiming that each subsequent severed limb is just a flesh wound. The lack in this example is quite literally the Black Knight's missing limbs. The excess is the absurd confidence he continues to exhibit as he dies. I'll bite your legs off! It's the bringing together of 2 disparate elements, brutal violence and reckless confidence, that creates this comedic moment. It's the same reason that it's funny when Michael Scott burns his foot on a George Foreman grill in The Office, which is a dumb household injury, and then insists on sneaking his foot inside of an x-ray machine. If he had the same injury but treated it like it wasn't a big deal, that wouldn't be comedic. If he had a serious injury and treated it seriously, also not funny. But a non-serious injury treated with absurd seriousness does the trick. While using a philosophical formula to evaluate comedy seems about as fun as bringing a dietitian with you to Taco Bell, it can help us see what the funniest comedy news shows have in common and make sense of when jokes fall flat. So let's look at the origin of the modern comedy news wave in America, the original Daily Show. Many of the earliest segments on the show involved correspondents like Stephen Colbert and Steve Carell going out and interviewing small-town politicians or oddballs with the journalistic intensity of reporting on war crimes. But most modern comedy news has shifted away from field reporting and absurdist characters towards talking head-style monologues. For example, in this recent segment from Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, she talks about the very serious issue of reopening America in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And while there are some genuinely funny zingers,
Trump called on people to liberate Minnesota, Michigan, and Virginia. Man, the Franklin Mint chess sets from this new Civil War are gonna be ugly.
She mostly talks about the dire seriousness of the situation. So we have an excessive response to an excessive situation. One might themselves nod along and agree with B in this segment, but you're probably not unexpectedly chuckling. And sure, not everything needs to be funny, or funny as McGowan defines it, but there is another kind of pitfall to this style of comedy news. It lacks what McGowan argues makes comedy politically potent in the first place, which helps get us into the relationship between comedy and political news. McGowan thinks that there is an inherent connection between comedy and politics, writing, "Comedy has the potential to act as a site for radical emancipatory politics, but it can just as easily function in the most ideological fashion in the guise of radicality. In other words, comedy can be a magic pill that helps open our eyes to what's really going on, or it can simply reaffirm the status quo. It can help us see contradictions in our world, or pacify us into contently chuckling about nobody taking away grandpa's keys. Jokes can make us question our world and ourselves, or jokes can just affirm what we already know." And that's why when Trevor Noah talks about the impeachment trial on The Daily Show, there aren't any truly surprising comedic moments, as it's assumed that most of the audience already agrees with the particular point of view being expressed. The jokes aren't pointing out any instances of lack or contradictions either in Noah himself or with the audience. Instead, all lack and critique is on one side. Of course, this isn't universally true for Noah or any of these shows. Later in the same segment, correspondent Michael Costa does some reporting from the field, which places some critical lack on the side of the Democrats joyously celebrating Trump's impeachment, but it's more or less a softball criticism.
The mood here, it's downright depressing. Yeah, Nancy, today sucked, huh?
Comedy like this usually doesn't challenge preconceptions, it simply affirms them. This is why McGowan writes that comedy has the ability to deprive us of our safety net. And this is why recognizing what's at stake in comedy has the status of an ethical imperative. Comedy is related to ethics because it can distance us from our comfortable worldview and challenge us to notice the contradictions in our own ideals. We can see a comedy news show that functions like this in the work of yet another Daily Show alum, Hasan Minhaj, and his show Patriot Act. Unlike the nightly news format used by The Daily Show and Full Frontal, Patriot Act uses the format of an investigative journalism show to deep dive into a specific topic with each episode. And Minhaj's particular format often achieves what McGowan calls egalitarian comedy, which is when both the source of the comedy and its target appear divided internally. It is the emergence of this internal division that enables us to laugh while also facilitating critique. For example, in the episode about Amazon, Minhaj doesn't just talk about how Amazon is ethically dubious while we nod along in the knowledge that we also have the correct opinion. Instead, the episode points out that we are complicit in some of the things that are bad about this company by participating in it. So the source of the comedy, Minhaj, and the target, Amazon, both juxtaposes the excessive wealth of Amazon and its lack of ethical treatment of its employees, and our own excessive knowledge of these wrongdoings with our own lack of commitment to doing anything about it.
Unlike Facebook and Google, who need your customer data to sell ads to businesses, Amazon is a one-stop shop. They know who you are, what you buy, and will sell it directly to you. Despite knowing all of this, I'm not gonna lie, I'm still gonna use Amazon. It's an essential utility for me.
So for comedy news to work as a source of news and information, it has to be capable of evaluating all sides of an issue or story, even if that means making visible the contradictions shared by the host and audience. This is why comedy news shows often work best when they swing both ways, which isn't to say that these shows are sexually open, but rather that they use comedy to critically consider both ends of the political spectrum, even if doing so challenges the audience's assumptions. This was a particular strength of Stewart's tenure on The Daily Show. While Stewart was firmly situated on the left, he had no qualms about roasting his own camp. Without that ethos, we end up in the danger zone of clapter, where rather than responding to jokes with laughter, we clap along to affirm that we also agree with the right ideas. When a comedy news show veers too far into clapter, we end up with what McGowan calls conservative comedy, which doesn't refer to conservative political parties, but rather to comedy that aims to affirm ideologies rather than challenge them. We can see this in the previously mentioned Full Frontal segment, where Samantha Bee affirms one point of view that implies the exclusion of another. This style of comedy news locates all of the lack or ridicule on a particular external group or authority, and locates the excess of goodness on the side of its host and audience. It might criticize authority, but it leaves the viewer and host unscathed. And of course, this criticism goes beyond laughter. Because McGowan thinks that comedy has an inherently philosophical structure, any news source aiming to really seek out the truth would have to operate with the same commitment to locating a lack in the social order. And while studies and surveys have long shown that many young people consider comedy news shows as their primary news source, other studies have shown that these people might have good reason to do this. Researchers at the University of Delaware actually found that regular viewers of satirical news were better informed than regular viewers of cable news. And it's not too surprising that the most informed of these viewers were those regularly watching Last Week Tonight with Jon Oliver. The show has become known for wide-ranging critiques of powerful people and institutions, and its ability to inspire social change has led to multiple news sources writing about the Jon Oliver effect. This effect has led to massive campaigns against the tobacco industry, televangelists, and the coal mining industry. So it seems like, at its best, comedy news is capable of the type of humorous reporting that can lead to social change by criticizing both those in power and its audience. But at its worst, it offers the sort of in-group logic that creates more thoughtful nods than it does gut-busting laughs. While some, like The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and Full Frontal, might lean towards the latter category, shows like Last Week Tonight and Patriot Act have veered towards the former. This all leads us back to our initial question: is comedy news deep or dumb? It seems that rather than falling simply on one side of this dichotomy, that comedy news is both deep and dumb. Sorry, it's deep when it challenges our preconceived notions and dumb when it leads to self-satisfied clapter. And each show probably has genuine moments of both. But what do you think, Wisecrack? Is comedy news a valuable source of both laughs and information, or is it just a low-stakes way to relax by chuckling at the news? Let us know what you think in the comments. And before you go, I want to give one last shout out to Dragon City. Once you have a collection of dragons, you can take them to battle and collect gold and EXP. Use food to level your dragons, and after some training, they should be ready to win some battles. The game offers different PvP modes where you can take your favorite dragons and fight in the leagues or in the arena. There are new events every week like Match 3, puzzles, and mazes. Start growing your dragon collection and go to battle today. Hit the link in the description to download the game for free. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.